the important things for me are, for example, use of time.
Yes.
If you don't show up for meetings on time, you have a huge problem with me.
Exactly.
And I call this, if I cannot trust you in the small things, don't expect me to trust you in the big things.
Welcome to the I Own It podcast with Ben Reinberg.
All right, we are live from Laguna Beach, California at the Ben Reinberg I Own It studios today. And I'm really excited to talk to this gentleman. He actually flew in to see us today. I'm really grateful. Eric Kish, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks
it's really nice to see you. So to kick things off, share about your company, Nanoramic Lab, what it focuses on.
It's very simple. So it's a startup that came out of MIT 13 years ago. And with a lot of government money, they developed cutting-edge technologies for energy storage. I joined them 6 years ago as CEO, essentially to take the technology to market. And now we are at the point where it can have a huge impact on cost of batteries, mileage of batteries, et cetera, et cetera. So the essence is we want to disrupt the current state of the battery technology that goes into a car.
Okay.
That's what it is.
The kind of R&D breakthroughs you're looking to achieve, like how did this all get started, this concept, and how far along are you on your journey to solve the problem you see?
The company's been around for 13 years now, so a lot of years of research. This is one of those industries where an overnight success takes 10 years. Okay, so it's nothing that can happen overnight. And they went through a lot of R&D, especially for NASA. So they developed energy storage devices to fly to Venus and back. I mean, pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, very cool.
But there are not many missions to Venus, so you need to make some money out of it. And about 4 years ago, we started to apply this technology to lithium-ion batteries. And the impact was enormous. I mean, we are way beyond our expectations in terms of what we can do to a battery. Just to give you an idea, if you apply our technology to a regular battery, you have between 30 to 50% more miles, and it will cost you 30% less. Okay, so that's enormous. And our biggest problem is not that technology doesn't work, it's skepticism, because the numbers are very big. And I think the last event that we had, which was General Motors investing in us about 2 weeks ago, after about 2.5 years of technical due diligence with us, it's a huge milestone for us because an actual car manufacturer says, yes, this is something that works and we want to put it in our cars.
That's great. Are a lot of the car manufacturers gravitating to this and saying this is something we want to pursue?
Right now, we are working with all the major North American and European car manufacturers. We work less with Asia, mostly because of IP concerns, but there's enough market in North America and Europe. I would say the other guys are about 6 to 12 months lagging GM in this, but I think we will be in a car in about 3 years.
So without going too deep in the weeds, I know our audience would know, explain the science behind the battery research.
Our
Yes,
research, you mean?
Absolutely.
All right, so it all started with nanocarbon science. So you have these new materials that are the size of nanometric size, very, very small, but they happen to be the strongest and most flexible materials known to man. And on top of that, they're extremely electrically and thermally conductive. So it's a magical material. The question is, how do you work with it? And we didn't invent nanocarbons, but we invented a way to use nanocarbons in energy storage. And that's the big breakthrough. They're called carbon nanotubes or graphene. There are various forms of nanocarbons. And essentially what we invented, and we covered it with patents all over, is how to make components of batteries using this material. Okay, so cathodes and anodes. These are the two components that we are applying for. And the results are very, very impactful. I mentioned cost, I mentioned mileage. There is more to it. There also happens to be the greenest battery on Earth, meaning doesn't have any toxic substances, can work on multiple sources of materials. I don't want to go into the weeds of how the industry works, but there is a big talk about not enough minerals available, which is not true. There is a very wide range of materials now that you can use as long as you enable them, and you're not, locked in countries like Congo or, supply chains controlled by China, as long as you can play with these materials in a smart way. Okay, so. And we are an enabler of that. So that's a big thing that we bring to the table.
So your website mentioned how battery technology could be used for airplanes, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah.
I hear less about batteries for airplanes, obviously, versus automobiles. How do the technology requirements differ for each?
So people talk about energy storage in general, and they think the battery is the solution to everything. But when you say battery, it's actually what battery for what application, because every single application has very different needs. For example, a car needs low weight and low volume because there's not enough place in a car. Mm-hmm. If you want to store energy in your house from solar, weight doesn't matter, right? Or in even volume. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they're very different conditions. For flight, even in flight, you have two distinct operational patterns. One is takeoff and landing, and the other one is, a regular cruise. And the energy sources that you need for those are very different. Okay. If you go electric. So when you take off and land, you need a lot of power. When you cruise, you need a lot of energy. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's why you will probably have 2 or 3 sources of energies in an airplane to fulfill these operational conditions. And there's a lot of work happening right now in aircrafts, and batteries are getting. Of course, batteries in aircrafts. Safety is a huge concern. Mm-hmm. Weight is a huge concern. Volume, not so much, but every kilogram for an aircraft to take off and landing counts enormously. So you need batteries that are more dense in terms of energy density. And we've seen in the last, I would say, 3 years, densities doubling. And I think they will triple soon, which will make the electric flight much closer to reality than it is today. And there are 2 types of flight: the regular flight, right, and then the eVTOL, the one that vertical takeoff and landing. And these are very different applications. Right?
If you had to guess, say commercial aircraft for the masses, say even in the United States, is this, if you had a guess, is this 5, 10, 20 years down the road? How fast? Because remember, when Tesla came on the scene, it exploded, mm-hmm, and now more and more manufacturers. Yeah. What do you envision in a time frame for aircraft to say, hey, we're going to be using batteries and not JP1, not jet fuel, and have the ability that we can lower costs now of airline flights? So
look, I don't think long distance flight can be done with batteries anytime soon.
Okay.
However, if you can do a short range, like flying from Laguna Beach to San Francisco, mm-hmm, that can be a very cheap flight with electric propulsion. So you might see segmentation of this, and not like in cars, that all cars can become electric. I don't think that's possible in flight, especially for mid-range or long-range aircraft.
So explain to everyone, what's the business model for Nanoramic Labs, and who are your customers, and how do investors view the risk profile for investing in the lab?
So we are an engineering and intellectual property company. We don't manufacture things. We're just a lab with very, very smart people. Half of my guys are PhDs. Okay, I sometimes say that I'm the stupidest guy in the room with an MBA. So,
actually, that's actually a smart approach, hiring people more talented than you. So, yeah, great job.
yeah. So you have these very, very smart people. You just have to give them a commercial angle. And what we do is we're very good at taking experiments from the lab in the industry. So we've been doing this for 13 years. By the way, lithium-ion batteries is not our only division. We have aerospace and defense division. We had a thermal management division that we sold last year. So you bring these brains together, you cook something in a lab, but then you design it for high volume manufacturing. And what we do is we license our technologies. So and that means we're very good, for example, at patenting stuff. We have more than 150 patents. We file about a patent a month, and it's a continuous process. We call this harvesting intellectual property. And then people don't actually want to license anything from you if they can steal it. It would be much easier. However, the science is complicated, and even if you protect with patents, you need to be able to support your client to actually make it happen at high volume manufacturing. So there's the engineering side of the business. But our money long term is made out of royalties, which is a wonderful business model, right? Once production goes up. The challenge is that people will not license from you unless you give them what I call the 10x factor. It's so disruptive, so huge for them that they are willing to cut a check every quarter.
Right.
Yeah. So that's where the challenge is. You need to be able to prove that you're fundamentally changing their business, and then they're willing to give you a cut out of that. So
I wanted to ask you this. Battery technology is the key to reducing fossil fuel consumption. And when you take a big step back at the state of climate change and the progress of the green economy, what's your perspective on how humanity is doing these days?
Can I bring something from my background?
Absolutely. You have the floor.
So in a previous life, I was CEO of an oil company.
Okay.
So I ran a refining and distribution business back in Europe. And, I had 2 large refineries, and I know everything about crude oil and gasoline. And I'm talking the years were 1999 through 2008. Electric cars were not on the horizon, okay? We were just getting pretty good at cleaning the gasoline, like from toxic elements like sulfur, but we couldn't really handle the CO2 problem. CO2 you generate when you burn fossil fuels. And I had a hard time envisioning how humanity will move to a solution from this. But then you get Elon Musk, right? And he takes a technology that is available for 20 years, but he engineers it better, okay? And then gets it to a price point that makes sense for the consumer. And on top of that, you drive the car. It's an amazing drive, right? It's like, I cannot drive anymore gasoline cars. I have like 3 electric cars in my garage. None of my members of my family wants to drive a gasoline car anymore because the driving experience, it's amazing.
It is.
So you need to get with this technology to a sweet spot where all of a sudden generates this critical mass and goes over the tipping point. In particular with electricity, and why I'm so optimistic about this, before with gasoline, you only had one source of energy, which was crude oil. And by the way, crude oil is mostly in countries that you don't want to live in.
Right.
But you had no alternative, right? Now with an electric car, you have many alternatives because you can generate the primary energy from many sources. Besides power generated through gas or whatever, then you have renewables now growing like crazy. And actually the storage part of it makes it so important, because how do you manage solar? How do you manage wind? Well, it happens when it happens, but it's not happen when you need it. So all of a sudden, what was done for the car now also enables the source of the energy. And people don't realize how fast renewables are coming to this country and to Europe. And what's even more interesting is the fastest growing renewable industry in the world is China. China has by far the biggest, for example, wind farms. And it's growing much faster than anywhere else. Now, to Biden's credit now with the Inflation Reduction Act, you can see this happening in the U.S. like overnight. The renewable capacity is growing at astronomical rates. So that's why I'm so optimistic, because now you can generate from many sources, and then you can put in any electric car, as opposed to buying from Russia or buying from Saudi Arabia or Venezuela or other failed states. Okay.
So my understanding that mining for lithium and other rare earth elements is a big question mark in scaling battery production. Do you agree with that? And also I wanted to ask, do you think politicians will move fast enough to let more of the needed mining to occur?
So first of all, availability of minerals, I think it's a false problem. I'm coming back to my oil and gas CEO hat. Mm-hmm. So for 150 years, there is always a guy that says that in the next 20 years we're going to run out of oil. And it never happened, because every 20 years they find 3 times more than available reserves. I think we're in the same situation with minerals for batteries, but it's even simpler for batteries, because for gasoline, you need to find oil. For batteries, you can make batteries from many types of materials, and you don't have to do everything with nickel or everything with cobalt, right? So that means that you have flexibility in where to go. Another point is, I don't know if you know, but the biggest reserves of these things are actually in Australia. Mm-hmm. Which is a pretty cool country.
Yes, absolutely.
And they have a huge mining industry, and they are a democracy, and I don't see anytime soon a dictatorship forming there. So it's not that bad. Plus, again, like in the crude oil example, people didn't start to look for it. So give them incentives, and all of a sudden you'll find out that they find lithium in places that you never thought of. Like recently in India, okay? They found a very, very large lithium reservoir, okay? So false problem. On top of that, I say technology advances so fast that the efficiency of extracting these minerals will be dramatically improved. And you have to remember, at the end of life of a battery, you can recycle 85 to 90% of it. So it's not like crude oil, you burned it and that's gone. You still can recycle a lot of it. So once you start getting end-of-life batteries, you'll have almost a self-sustaining economy of energy storage.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So I believe you have a business, not a science background. Is that correct? And you've been the leadership. You've had been the leadership challenges for you in running a company that is so R&D focused. Is that correct?
Well, look, this is my 12th company as CEO. So, and by the way, I do have a technical background. So I'm a power electronics engineer at Origin. That was 35 years ago. I actually worked in the defense industry in Israel. But pretty soon I didn't like to be an engineer. I preferred to hire engineers and give them work. So I moved on, and I've been CEO now for 25 years, okay? And I worked in 7 industries. I lived and worked in 11 countries. Don't ask me how, but it happened. Energy storage is pretty new to me. I mean, I'm in energy storage like 6 years now, but before that, 10 years I was in oil and gas. I was in defense electronics. I built gas stations. I mean, I did a lot of stuff. But then the question is, are you lucky enough to be in such a transformational place? I mean, this is like the opportunity of a decade, all this electrification. And I'm lucky and I'm in the right place at the right time. I don't know if this is me or my luck or whatever, but if we go by the saying that luck is preparation meets opportunity, probably I have something to do with it, right? And that's why it's so exciting right now.
So I wanted to touch on that, the Israeli military angle, before transitioning in the business world. What was your experience like being a soldier in Israel after not growing up there? And what insights did you learn in the military service that benefited you? Because now you've been wildly successful in business. There had to be some variables that transformed into your career.
Well, I need to go a little bit backwards into, I lived 3 lives in one, okay? My first life was, I'm born and raised in communist Romania. I'm born in 1964. I had my own, dictatorship experience. And I actually had to serve in 2 militaries in my life. So I served in the Romanian military when I was 18, and it was a draft. I served for a year, and then at the age of 24, I immigrated to Israel, and therefore I had to serve in the Israeli army. And these 2 things were like total opposites. And I think I learned also from the contrast of these 2 experiences, not only from the fact that I was a soldier for, I think in total I served like 11 years.
Oh, wow.
10 years in the Israeli army, the regular 3, and then in the reserves, like every good Israeli. I served in the Armored Corps. But then the experience and especially the leadership formation that I had in the Israeli army literally dominates my thinking when I run businesses. Okay, it was probably the best leadership. Not probably, I'm absolutely sure, the best leadership school I ever went through. As opposed to the Romanian army, which is a year of total stupidity, right? It's you go there and they basically tell you that you're a nobody and you're there to obey orders and you're not allowed to think. And in a way, it's like the Russian army today. I'm looking at the Ukrainian-Russian war and I'm like, I've seen this somewhere. Right? I've seen this top-down, don't think about it, obey orders. If you don't, you'll show up in front of a martial court, right? So really ridiculous 1 year of my life, okay? But the contrast was something that really taught me something. I saw in 2 different situations for theoretically the same problem. I saw 2 very different approaches, and I was lucky enough to serve 10 years in the Israeli army, and I think half of my success comes from that school.
So let's talk about that. What are some of the things you learned in the Israeli armies that you could teach people and say, here are some of the best qualities I learned that I incorporate in business that will help you become successful?
So the Israeli army is a very informal army. I don't know if people know, but we don't salute our officers. My uniform and a general's uniform look almost the same. We call them by their first name, and nobody feels,
So it's different than the United States.
Very different. Very different. Although I would say that there are some similarities between the Marine Corps and the Israeli army, although the formality is not there. Okay, there are very few events where you actually formalize anything. Parades, we don't like parades in Israel. We better do stuff, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is it's very, very pragmatic. It's no bullshit. I mean, remember, we've been at war for 75 years more.
That's right.
And when we say war, people don't realize that every month somebody fires rockets into Israel.
Yes.
And they call it a little skirmish, but there might be 30 rockets falling on population centers. And you live with this and you learn to live with this and you learn to be ready. Readiness is a very big thing in Israel, and most of the army is a reserve army. So I can give you an example. For us in the Armored Corps, between the moment you get a call and the moment you're on the front line, fully equipped, ready to for battle, it's 8 hours. Yeah, it's true. The country is small, but still 8 hours.
Yes.
It's 8 hours, right?
Yes.
So, so this builds up a lot of trust between you and your commander or your followers. It's all about collective readiness and not individual readiness. And it's interesting, in this environment of non-formality, they teach you, first of all, that we're here to cope with chaos. Any plan goes to hell pretty fast, and you have to be on top of the situation and take decisions. Even if you're a simple soldier, you're still expected to take decisions, to act on them. You're also expected to argue with your commander if you don't think you understood the mission. Okay, you're expected to, right? Now, translate this in the Romanian army, you'll go to jail pretty fast, right? So that was for me eye-opening, and I loved it. I actually pursued a little bit more of what I could do in a normal case in terms of command structures, and I went to every possible command course that I could. And I could immediately connect the dots to what I'm going to do in civilian life, right? So that's my Israeli experience.
So getting you to focus, discipline.
Well,
what are some other qualities that came out of it?
But it's not only discipline, it's pragmatic discipline.
Okay.
It's not about, hey, say yes and do everything. No, please ask me why. Please tell me that you don't understand the plan. Come up with your own plan, right? This is what differentiates, I think, the Israeli army from what we call a top-down regular army. You're expected to think. As a soldier, you're not allowed not to think and not to express your opinion about what you're supposed to do.
And that's part of my success in my company Alliance. I allow my leadership team employees to think out of the box, have your own autonomy, make decisions. You know, we have a 1-3 rule is identify the problem, come up with 3 solutions, and then the last number 1 is let's pick a solution to go forward with. It's hard for people to do that, to think, because they're worried about, am I making the right decision? So confidence, I'm sure, being in the Israeli army, it allows you to really grow your confidence, which leads to a lot of great outcomes as well.
But you see, the Israeli army, so when you're thinking leadership, the problem with leadership is you can delegate authority. You cannot delegate responsibility. Responsibility will always stay with you.
Right.
And the only way you can mitigate that is to train your people very well, make sure they understand the mission. That not only they understand the mission, but they also participated into the plan to achieve the mission. And that creates alignment, that creates trust. It's a lot about trust in the military. And we do lead from the front. That's a typical attitude of an Israeli officer. That's why we have high casualty percentages among officers. But your people, even if you're not there, they will still figure it out. Why? Because you clarified the mission for them and you trained them well. And that's what I do in business. I don't micromanage, but I'm disciplinarian when we train. I'm not disciplinarian when we do.
Okay.
When you do, you're already trained, you have clear mission, figure it out. Okay.
So if someone can't do, they get removed because obviously they're not focused on the training.
Absolutely.
And improving their expertise.
Yeah. And again, I'm a disciplinarian in the important things. And the important things for me are, for example, use of time.
Yes.
If you don't show up for meetings on time, you have a huge problem with me.
Exactly.
And I call this, if I cannot trust you in the small things, don't expect me to trust you in the big things.
That is so well said. I want everyone out there to listen to that comment. Very well said, because what I find in business as well is that, time is everything. And you have to value your time. Make it efficient. Focus. Don't get distracted by your phone or the outside world. And we have different generations now in business, which is interesting. And the younger generation is so social media concentrated. Last year was my first year into social media. And I've learned, I said, okay, I can see now why this is distracting for the younger generation, whether I see my kids or the millennials out there. And I think what can separate people is knowing how to manage your time, how to be disciplined, how to be focused. I use the word commitment. How bad do you want it? How bad do you want success? How bad do you want to go the extra mile to create that success? And a lot of people, what I find, especially the younger generation, is they are thinking about the phone. I have to respond to this text. But no one takes a step back and say, well, wait a minute. I'm the most important person in my life between my career, my health, my relationships. So can I detach from the phone? Can I detach from technology? And it's a great point you bring up. So your book, 5 to 50 to 500, focuses on scaling businesses in a practical, how-to-do way. Could you explain more in detail of the so what's of the business navigation framework you developed?
So, Liz, this came out of 25 years of practice. I like to experiment with small things, and if they work, I know how to deploy them. I don't believe in best practices. A best practice for you might not be a best practice for me. It's always depending on context. It depends on the challenge, and you have to critically look at things that other people do and see if they might work for you. And if they do, you start with a small experiment. Now, about 5 to 50 to 500. So I told you about the oil company. So what happened with that oil company? In 1999, I was hired by a private equity fund. They gave me $50 million, and they said, the oil industry in Eastern Europe is going bankrupt. And we want you to buy distressed oil assets and create a company out of this. And I bought 2 refineries out of bankruptcy for $50 million. That's all I had. Three years later, I went public at $500 million. Then I bought 4 more, not refineries, but distribution assets, storage assets, etc. And I sold the company 10 years later for $3.8 billion. And we went from 50 employees to 10,000 employees. And we went from $150 million in revenue to $12 billion, in 10 years. So if that's not scaling, I don't know what scaling is.
That is scaling.
Okay? And the principles I used to make that happen, I put it in that book.
Okay.
So that's
explain to everyone, if they haven't read the book, what are some key principles that you highlight? Just a few.
So one is the principle of strategic intent. So I never talk about plans. Plans are just scenarios that you play with to create patterns of decision making. You know the plan will not work.
Right.
You know that.
Right.
But the planning exercise is very valuable. But what is very important for people is to stay with the intent. So if the intent is to reach a certain goal, but then in the midst of the battle you figure out that there are better ways, just take the better ways. But you know you can take decisions in line with the intent of the mission. This is called in the military commander's intent. So the commander's intent is I tell you what's the objective, I tell you what's the end state I want to reach, and the rest you have to figure it out. Why? Because I trained you well.
That's right.
I trained you well, which means you can come with your own operational plans, try them, doesn't work, throw them out of the window, come up with another plan, but the objective is pretty clear. So that's the strategic intent part. And I come with practical tools to clarify intent. The second one is whatever mission you have, you need to create an organization able to drive towards that intent. And depending on a strategic intent, you might need very, very different organizations. And so the second pillar is this aligning of talent. And I am a very long time practitioner of behavioral science. I think that people don't understand that in the last 70 years, we actually are able to predict behavior through data. I can actually, in 4 minutes, you fill up a form and I can tell you what are your behavioral drives. And if I know that, I can engage you, right? Because I know what drives you.
Right.
So that's part of it. And the second part is the concept of readiness. So in the military, you're ready if you know and you can. That's knowledge and proficiency. You need both. I mean, I can send you to school and you'll come up with an MBA. Can you run a company?
Right.
You might have the knowledge, but you don't have the proficiency.
Right.
So readiness is this combination between proficiency and knowledge. And when I run companies, this is very systematic for me. I have roles, I have responsibilities, I have coverage of people with readiness on roles and responsibilities. I have backups for them. So I know, for example, that if I have to scale down, I'm not going to lose the knowledge of the company. And, the military discovered this a long time ago. Let me give you some points in history. 2 points in history. One is the German army before World War World War II was limited to 100,000 people. The Germans decided that they will have 100,000 officers. Okay, an army of officers, professional officers. Hitler came to power and decided he wants an army of 6 million people. Guess how many senior officers you need for 6 million people?
A lot.
100,000.
Yes.
So they've already had the core that would carry on the knowledge and can create proficiency. Okay? The Marine Corps in World War II went from 20,000 to 300,000 in 2 years. And they didn't lose their culture. They didn't lose their proficiency. Why? Because they have the core agents in it. Like, the core of the Marine Corps is the sergeant, the non-commissioned officer. He carries with him the knowledge and he can create proficiency. And you can go from nothing to very big because you have already the engine to create readiness. So that's what I do in business. I'm very, very systematic about this. So that's the second part. And the last part is, how do you run day to day? And I describe this as disciplined rituals. And I use the word ritual because rituals are what shapes culture. If you think about it, right, you get married, you have kids, it's a rite of passage.
Right.
There is a ritual for everything. If you're Jewish, you have bar mitzvah, you have a marriage, right, et cetera, et cetera. And this gives flow to your life. Why wouldn't that be true in business? But you have to be disciplined about it. I mean, even in marriage, when you get married, there is a script for it, right? The lady wears white, walks down the aisle. In Jewish tradition, you have to break glass, right? I have no idea why, by the way. But it's tradition, right? And that shapes your culture. In the same way, you can use discipline rituals to shape company cultures. So that's the third part of my book.
So I believe the history of leadership is a passion of yours, from what I know. But it's very interesting to me because who are a few historical figures whose leadership you're most inspired by from your history and how successful you've been?
So, not a very known person outside Israel, but he's still alive. It's Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak is actually the most decorated soldier in the history of the Israeli army. He was chief of staff when I landed in Israel, so it's sort of...
Sure.
When I joined the army, he became chief of staff. So very, very smart guy, very charismatic, but also very methodical. He was able to put complex concepts in simple terms, and he would build the readiness engine for the army to be able to deliver on that. Eventually, he became prime minister. Some say not very successful, but I think he's one of those military figures that has deep knowledge of history, and also many people don't know he actually has a degree from Stanford in technology, and that was done because the Army said, "What do you want to learn between junior officer and senior officer?" And he said, "I want to go to Stanford and understand technology so I can project this in military terms, because technology is such a huge differentiator now on the battlefield." So he's a huge inspiration for me. And I forgot to mention, my dad was a Navy officer, so I have some background in this. And my dad was a rocket scientist. He was on the wrong side of the wall. He was a Romanian Navy officer trained by the Soviet Union in 1960 to become an expert in missiles. You know, remember the missile crisis in 1962? So
that's right.
He was sort of one of a kind, but he was an avid reader. So we had books everywhere. I mean, half of my room was books because we had no place to put them, even under my bed. And I remember reading, so he had all the Russian marshals of World War II memoirs in Russian. So my dad, again, long story, my mother is Russian Jewish, so I speak Russian.
Okay.
And I read when I was 11 all the memoirs of the Russian marshals of World War II in Russian.
Wow.
Yeah? But that's not the cool part. The cool part was that my dad also had memoirs of the other side. You know, Nimitz, for example. I remember I read it at 12, the history of Nimitz and World War II, etc., etc. So very open-minded like this. But also with an appreciation that history, it's a very good teacher for the future. And I read 1 or 2 books a week. This I cannot stop. This is for me a hunger. A lot of it is history. A lot of it is military history. But also in general, I'm fascinated by how societies evolve and how leadership plays a role in this. And what can you learn from other people's mistakes, right? Because if you want to learn from your own mistakes, that's not a very good way of learning. And that's how I was formed as a leader in business, by reading a lot of books, and I continue to read a lot of books.
So the name of the show is I Own It, owning every aspect of your life, your behavior, relationships, you name it. We are all works in progress. Obviously, you're an avid reader. Was there a time, a recent example, you could look back and say, I didn't own it fully? What would be that example you could share?
Look, I think I never owned it fully, because number one, life is not what you plan for. Life, it's whatever comes, and you have to be ready for it. And remember, I lived 3 lives, right? I lived the communist life.
Yeah.
Then I lived a period where that was immediately after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when everything changed, and I could never imagine that we in 2022 will have a war between a Russian dictator and Ukraine. This was beyond my comprehension. The moment freedom came to so many countries, how can you not maintain that, right? I'm still in shock, right? That only in 30 years we basically came back to square one. But it was a time of renewal. It was a time of tolerance.
Okay.
It was a time, I mean, the 90s were amazing for me, amazing, compared to my, communist
background
times. And I thought, we figured it out. And then 9/11 happens, then you have wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, then you have Putin coming to power, and everything sort of comes and swings back into negative territory. So there's a lesson in this, right? So you're never prepared for it. And if you think about it, I'm looking at my kids. Look at the impact of AI.
Yes.
I'm a guy who was born in 64, and I saw how computers were born, and now I have them in my pocket. Unimaginable. But then we're going far further than that. So the acceleration of technology adoption is so fast these days. How do you cope with this? How do you cope with this abuse of information that goes in every day in your life? And if you don't come back and say, well, not everything is important, and you have to have discipline in your life, because otherwise life will drive you, you will not drive life.
That's right.
So I take care of myself. I'm a big meditator.
I was going to go into that. Like, let's talk about that. I meditate as well. Tell me about your routine that you could share. Like, what does a day look like?
So, first of all, something that dramatically changed my life was I sold the business, and between 2008 and 2010, when I came to the US, I was in a moment of life where I didn't know what to do with myself, and I even bordered depression. And then I decided, you know what, I need to learn new things. Like, for example, I went to Peru and climbed mountains and took lessons from shamans in the Andes about energy healing. I just wanted completely different stuff, right? And then I discovered meditation, and for me, I tried many forms of meditation. What works for me is transcendental meditation. Okay, so I meditate twice a day, 20 minutes. It's transformational for me, this thing. It's the only thing that stops my brain, literally stops my brain. All the thoughts are kind of getting out of my head. Because I've been practicing now for 13 years, I very quickly enter the transcendental stage. So that's a big routine in my life. Second, I'm very careful what I eat. Yeah, I'm 58 now, going on 59.
Sure.
I like to ski. That's why I live in Boulder, Colorado, for the skiing. I'm also a bad surfer.
Okay.
So every vacation I have, I need to go and surf somewhere.
Well, you are in the surfing capital of the world,
yes.
But you're not dressed appropriately.
I am not dressed appropriately.
If you strip down, you'll be okay. Or you throw on a wetsuit.
So I try to keep this, but without doing extreme sports. And I eat only twice a day.
Okay.
And most of it is not meat.
Right.
No sugar. So that's how I take care of myself. And I know I have a regular life, let me put it this way. I don't like extremes. I like to have time for me to read, to think. I am not, I'm not into the fear of missing out.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So you're present.
I am present.
Which is a beautiful thing to be. That's great.
Yeah. I can close my phone.
That's good.
Yeah.
Do you exercise at all? Any
do,
weight training? Any cardio?
I don't do cardio.
No.
So I'm more into hiking. So Boulder is a great place to hike.
Oh, it's fantastic.
So I go 2-3 times a week and hike. That's where I really connect to the earth and nature. But I don't do anything that forces my muscles or anything else. I'm not into that.
So we're going to wrap up with our 3 questions. Are you ready?
Please.
All right. So to your left, my right is our couch.
Okay.
And you're 58 years old. You're going to be 59 soon. And I would say, Eric, lay on the couch. Okay. Relax. Kick your feet up. You've been through a lot in your life, more than most.
Yeah.
And just different experiences, cultures, languages. How many languages do you speak?
6, I speak.
Okay, 6 languages. Most people speak 1.
Yeah.
Go back to when you're 16 years old. You're living in Romania.
Yeah.
Young man. What advice, knowing what you know now, which is an incredible life, to go back and what would you tell yourself if you could kind of roll back and say, here's the advice I would give you? What would that be?
So the advice to my 16-year-old self would be do whatever you think is right. So what happened to me was I wanted to emigrate to Israel when I was 14.
Mm-hmm.
However, that would have been a disaster for my dad, which would have lost his career, because that's how communist works. If you emigrate to another country, your whole family is doomed. And he was very opposed to it. Eventually, my dad defected to the United States when I was 22. We were punished as a family. It was me, my sister, my mother.
Mm-hmm.
But it created the opportunity for me to emigrate to Israel, which I couldn't do for this whole period because my dad would have been affected. And I lost, I think, if I would return back and I would say, what would you want to do again in your life if you start again? I would say, I want to join the Israeli army at 18, become an officer, a professional officer, etc. I landed in Israel at the age of 24.
Mm-hmm.
That was way too late for a career in the military. You start at 18. By 24, you can be a battalion commander.
Sure.
Okay, so way too late. And I learned very fast that I have to take chances and meet the opportunity when it comes. Okay, I never say no to stuff. Okay. And I'm not that I'm fearless. I'm fearless. Like, you should have some fear in life. But I say, what the fuck? Let's do it.
Right.
Because you never know. It will be, again, my 16-year-old who would say, well, I cannot do this because of my dad.
Right.
And by the way, my dad passed away 4 years ago.
Uh-huh.
The fact that he defected to the United States, he probably should have done it 10 years before.
Sure.
Okay? So my thinking as a child was, I have to take care of my dad, as opposed to the other way around. My dad has to take care of me. That's how I treat my children. I never ask for my children to do anything for me. They have their own lives. I do my job in the sense that I take them through school, but then they are on their own.
Yeah.
And I put absolutely no constraints on what they want to do in life.
I do the same thing. Because I said, who am I as an entrepreneur to handcuff my kids and tell them they can't do things?
Exactly.
So, well said. Thank you for sharing that. So it's our last day on earth. God forbid. It's just me and you.
Yeah.
Just me and you. It's our last meal together.
Yeah.
It's your choice. What are we eating and what are we drinking?
I would not.
By the way, it's our last day on earth, so you can you can go crazy.
All right. So I'm a huge fan of Israeli food.
Okay. I could do that.
So I can. And I have a place, by the way, in Palo Alto that called Oren Hummus, which is like Israeli food. Like I would fly to Tel Aviv and eat it. So that would be my last meal. Okay. And I would just drink water.
Okay.
I'm not.
All right.
I'm not gonna go high.
Going out in style.
I would just say it is what it is.
I love it.
I enjoy my last meal.
All right.
Yeah.
So you're live in studio, which I love, and I'm very grateful for you to be here. And you're always welcome here. We have a grand piano, drums, electric guitars. And if you could have any musician or band, they could be living or deceased, walk through that black door and start playing, who would come through the door and what song would they play us? Your choice.
It's very simple.
Yes.
AC/DC, Back in Black.
Oh, wow. I love that.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's ever said AC/DC on this show.
AC/DC, Back in Black.
What a great choice.
So in the 70s, late 70s, AC/DC was a symbol of freedom for us kids. And by the way, in a previous life, I had my own band, and I played AC/DC songs.
Oh, wow.
1977.
Okay. What instrument did you play?
Guitar and vocals.
Oh, wow.
But back vocals, not lead vocals.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
What a treat. And definitely encourage everyone to read your book. It's fascinating. If you are interested in more episodes like this on the Ben Reinberg I Own It show, kick that subscribe button on the right-hand button. Click the like button as much as you can to let these episodes go viral, just like Eric just dropped on us. And thank you, Eric, for joining us. If you're interested in following me, go to benreinberg.com. You can follow me on all social media platforms. And if you're interested in learning more about commercial real estate, go to my company, AllianceCGC.com, and look at the brand new fund we rolled out, the Alliance Medical Property Fund. We are the leaders in investing in medical office throughout the United States. Eric Kish, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for joining us. It was great to have you.
Thank you for listening to the I Own It podcast with Ben Reinberg. To hear our past episodes and connect with Ben, visit benreinberg.com.